everyone thinks they can have a say because they have access to social media tools. And for instance, chatbots are particularly important, but there's a responsibility as well. I think people, if they're going to speak, well, one thing is me, that I'm a thought leader and the interview, and as well business educator and so forth. But even me, I have a responsibility. So if someone is in their house and trashing people, for God's sake, use your energy to produce something positive, because the negative energy and this part, unfortunately, of humanity, it's just a destruction machine. And I think that's my biggest challenge, is that level of destruction that we have as humans, it's very scary.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Engati Engage, our interview series. We have the pleasure of welcoming Dinis Guarda for today's episode. I'm Aishwarya Sankhe from the Engati team. Let's begin with a quick introduction of Engati. Engati is the world's leading multilingual no-code chatbot platform, available across 14 channels with 25,000 bots. Created across 186 countries in every domain and use case. We run the Engati blog and the video channel, which receives upwards of 300,000 visitors annually. And now for our guest. Dinis Guarda is an author, academic, influencer, serial entrepreneur, and leader in 4.1R AI, Fintech, digital transformation, and blockchain. He's ranked as one of the most influential people in blockchain in the world by right relevance. Is listed in Cointelegraph's top people in blockchain. He is also listed as one of the 100 B2B thought leaders and influencers to follow in 2020 by Thinkers 360. With over 2 decades of experience in international business, C-level positions, and digital transformation. Dinis has worked with new tech, cryptocurrencies, drive ICOs, regulation, compliance, legal international processes, and has created a bank, and has been involved in the inception of some of the top 100 digital currencies. Welcome, Dinis. We're thrilled to have you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So let's just jump right into the first question. How has fintech evolved with AI and technology?
So it's a very good question. So I think if you look at the history of finance, specifically in the last 100 years, finance has been one of the most innovative areas because, of course, it's about money. Money needs to be continually shifting. And as well, since the 16th century with the Medicis until now, of course, in 500 years, a lot of things happening. But in the last, especially in the last 20 years, as we start having more and more transactions and the globalization became a normal standard, the industry had to use the best of innovation to come up with the best solutions. And of course, there comes the inception of fintech that came out of finding ways to leverage tools and innovation tools that could actually accelerate different things. And of course, fintech has been evolved massively. And of course, at present days that we have, artificial intelligence, which is still in its early days, but especially the areas of machine learning, are being applied to look at crunching data. And of course, the financial industry is probably the most advanced one in the world in terms of the usage of artificial intelligence. So at the moment, when we talk about artificial intelligence, we talk mostly about machine learning, and we talk about the areas of how machine learning relates with the analytics and data and big amounts of data. So when it comes to financial markets, capital markets, trading and investing, more and more the investors, the traders are relying on efficient data analytics, and then right now are looking at predictive tools to manage different things. And for instance, if you see, most of the hedge funds right now are managed completely by algorithm-driven trading strategies. If you look at the likes of Bloomberg, which were probably the first ones creating what we have right now in terms of financial mainstream with Bloomberg Terminal, at the moment, a lot of this data is managed by a lot of different sources of APIs, picking data from the markets, from indicators, indexes, and so forth. And then all this data is put in pipelines, and then we have algorithms cleaning data and improving this. And of course, this is kind of the mainstream finance. At the moment, most of the studies are stating that around 90% of the world finance is being managed by machines or driven by machines, whereas actually there's a paradox, the world economy only around 10 to 20%. So we have a kind of imbalance between the financial world and the rest of the economic world. I think the artificial intelligence is particularly important for a lot of different areas, specific in capital markets, trading and investing, but as well more and more for the general banking and financial industry. And I think specifically fintech becomes right now the default setting for any bank or any financial organization in the world. And I don't think any bank that is not using fintech tools is better to stop working, because it would be taken over by a fintech player. So the likes of Revolut or Robinhood, or even WeChat with the WeChat Pay and a lot of different things. Over there in India, a lot of chatbots. First, chatbots are a critical element for interacting with financial and banking clients. And increasingly, I think artificial intelligence is going to be the default setting. Of course, when you talk about artificial intelligence, we cannot just talk about one thing. There's a lot of different things. And of course, we cannot forget as well the areas of blockchain, but especially for the credibility and security of the data, and as well to make sure that the distribution of identity gets clear. Because the identity, let's say my identity as a financial transaction person, needs to be certified. Otherwise, I can be, of course, hacked and my money can be stolen. So I think especially AI in fintech is right now becoming a default setting, from on open APIs where you have amounts of data that are managed, until chatbots or AI chatbots that interact and look at the clients, then to credit scores and social scores, and a lot of different things, insurance rankings, indexes, and of course social media data that is transacting massive amounts, especially in big data and so forth.
So you mentioned a lot of technology. So you mentioned chatbots. So how else are chatbots used in financial services, and what lies ahead for chatbots?
Yeah, I think, and you guys, of course, are a company on that area. So I think definitely chatbots are, for me, one of the critical elements, because as a client, there's a need to interact between the company or the bank and the financial organization and the client.
Right.
So you need to have almost real-time information about what is happening. For instance, right now during the COVID-19 pandemic, it's more important than ever. For instance, you want to make sure that there's nothing wrong with your finances. If you are a business, you want to understand with everything that is happening with the bank. And I think the bots, and especially chatbots, more sophisticated, are critical and are going to be even more important. I think we're still in the early days, and I see that I think companies like yours are critical to innovate and to come up with better solutions. Because, for instance, I think a lot of banks are not using this properly. For instance, even me, that I'm quite technical and very involved on building technology and as well managing different tools. But for instance, all my major banks, none of them is interacting with me, which is very stupid, because I'm an influencer, I'm involved on this. And for instance, if they would be interacting with me and coming up with, even if it would be like the first stage, okay, there's this possibility of you interacting with us. There's this possibility of getting a loan or getting an incentive from the government in the case of the UK, or in the case of China or India or the US. And I think the banks need increasingly to use this to interact and find fast ways of coming up with solutions, but as well to alert and to educate. And I think this is a critical element. And I think it's definitely, I would say that is where from a bot in a chat to a Facebook Messenger, or simply to interact on a day-to-day with your client, because this can make, for instance, a good example. Yesterday, I was talking with one of the biggest business analysts in the world, professor of University of Edinburgh, Professor Jamal Unish. And for instance, we were talking that, for instance, at the moment, for instance, 2 in 5 businesses worldwide are going bankrupt or closing. Okay, so if the governments or the banks are interacting with chatbots and understanding our business are facing problems, you could use this data to immediately tackle the problems and get eventually credits or at least some liquidity to make sure that these businesses are not going bankrupt. So this is a macro element where we can use this, but there's thousands of examples where we can use. So that definitely bots are one of the elements, actually, from AI to more business analytic driven and the intelligence, but as well a critical element to understand the health of the relationships between the organizations. And I think the best global organizations are already looking at this, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done on this.
I agree with you completely. I think chatbots, especially right now, people are really seeing the value of chatbots and AI, especially in this situation, because people obviously can't come to work. Most people are working from home. So how are we expecting to get real-time solutions? So I think that's when chatbots really come in and help out. And if chatbots aren't able to, then there's a good transition between chatbots to a live agent. And at least within the 24 hours, I think a customer's queries can be taken care of. So I think that's amazing for
Yeah, no, I think you, like you mentioned before, if you use AI and chatbots, it should be immediately, because I think a lot of the insights, especially with artificial intelligence, you can answer straight away. And actually, sometimes you can save a business or save a life, especially if you look at healthcare or if you look at other things. So definitely, and for instance, I've been working voice driven chatbots. And I think I know that, for instance, your company is working banking, business consulting, human resources, IT service, travel and lifestyle. For instance, lifestyle, it's increasing important in healthcare. Imagine if someone is feeling bad, and you can get a chatbot to understand if it's Hispanic or if it's real. Because if it's real, the person can die. So this could save healthcare billions, and as well billions of lives that can be optimized. So I believe in all of these things, and especially in education. I believe that the future of education is going to be driven through chatbots and more. AI-driven chatbots or personal assistants. Yeah.
So earlier you mentioned blockchain. So do you believe that blockchain is here to stay and will fundamentally alter the digital fintech landscape? What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's already there. So if you look that there's around 300 billion, so purely from a numbers perspective, that there's 300 billion dollars of transactions in cryptocurrencies, which is just one of the tiny examples of blockchain. But then you have a lot of different areas. So from a cryptocurrencies, definitely is already there, is mainstream. We have, of course, even Facebook creating their own cryptocurrency. The Chinese government is creating their own digital currency, and a lot of other governments around the world. So it's already mainstream. It's not even here to stay. I think the challenge that when we speak about blockchain, we cannot speak about blockchain as we speak about one technology. So let's say, if I ask you, what is the internet? You're not saying that the internet is just an email. It's thousands of different tools. So blockchain is a lot of tools as well. It's from smart contracts technology to AI-driven smart contracts that can actually look at the identity of the data, distributed ledgers, cloud computing, where you put the data in a lot of different servers or nodes that are not just one. And there's as well the idea of blockchain for rewarding systems, blockchain for identity, which is critical for identity of the data and so forth. So definitely 90% of the world is already using at least mainstream big corporations for supply chain, Unilever, Procter & Gamble, all these major supply chain companies in the world are already using. For instance, Vodafone is using blockchain technology to make sure that the supply chain of their products is in the right angle. So we have from banking to supply chain to financial industry to even healthcare industry. So all of these industries are starting to use this. I think the problem is that because of the crypto, there's a lot of myths and a lot of misconceptions around the concept of blockchain. And I think AI is more consensual because it's just artificial intelligence, and there's a kind of a visibility that AI is like this kind of Terminator, or at least if you look at the Star Trek methodology or visualization, is a bit more positive, but people are used to that. Whereas blockchain, people think, okay, it's crypto, it's Bitcoin, there's a lot of different things. But no, blockchain is about decentralized technology. This is decentralized different systems to create more, and as well crypto comes from crypto security. So it's about using crypto security and as well encryption of technology. So that's the inception of this. The name is a bit misconceived, but yeah, it's already mainstream right now, and I think all the industries, and especially the fintech landscape, is using massive amount of blockchain technology, from the biggest trading platforms to the biggest especially big banks that want to use blockchain to make sure that we have transactions safer. And as well, for instance, even Microsoft or IBM are using blockchain as a service. Oracle, Microsoft, and you can go and name most of the big corporations in financial, from Goldman Sachs to JP Morgan is one of the banks with more patents in blockchain technology. And of course, you just need to do the central banks. For instance, we've been working actually blockchain for central bank solutions. And for instance, if the Chinese government is launching their digital currency, I don't need to say more. It's mainstream right now.
Right. So this is just for my curiosity's sake. I feel like Bitcoin gets a bad rep. Like it used, especially ages ago, it used to get a bad rep. So how do we combat this problem? How do we change people's perspective about blockchain, Bitcoin, and other cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, there's a lot of education to be made. Of course, this is about education. But for instance, if you go to the beginning of the internet, okay, the beginning of the internet was associated with scams, with porno, and a lot of different things. So it was not necessarily perceived completely positive, even if it was a force for good. So I think I don't think we should look at this. Of course, the challenge is that the internet, everyone could use it. It was more like simple because you had Google, you had a lot of different tools. Whereas when it comes to blockchain, giving that comes from encryption technology and more advanced technology is a bit of a complex thing to explain to someone in the street or to your grandmother. So I think the challenge here is how can we demystify this? But a lot of this is making sure that we have case studies. And I think when you speak about blockchain, we need to look, okay, this is used as a way to increase the supply chain facilities. So make it simple, not coming up with all this kind of sometimes stupid. And as well, there's a big problem sometimes in the blockchain industry, which I am part, is that a lot of people think, okay, blockchain is going to solve all the problems of the world. Actually, no technology solves the problems of the world. It's us as humans that can solve the problems. Actually, look at COVID-19 is we have all the best technology in the history of mankind, and we are all struggling with the virus, okay, which is not even the most deathly virus, but because the degrees of infection are so big, we cannot control it. So any technology needs to be demystified, and actually they exist for us to protect ourselves. So I think that should be the demystification should be the biggest angle on that.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. So how are fintech startups changing traditional norms? How are they leveraging the latest tech trends to their advantage?
So I think right now fintech is kind of, we can more or less, I would say, fintech and the financial world are synonyms. Okay, traditional norms around finance, it's all about fintech. So let's say we are talking right now through Zoom and through a video conference system. But for instance, anything I do in banking right now is for finance and technology. I have to have an app. Even if I go to a balcony and in a third world country or emerging market, I still have to go and someone will be with the computer on the other side, even if it's a very bad computer, but they still have to use. So that means at the moment it's already mainstream, and it's already part of traditional norms. I would say that at the moment, the next level is going to be, for instance, there's a lot of studies right now stating that the amount of money being transaction is going to be shifting from paper to digital. For instance, I live in Sweden for 6 years, and in Sweden, to be honest, or between Sweden and Denmark, which is, for instance, some of the most advanced countries, for instance, I had a personal identity number for both countries because I was literally working between the two countries, and most of my transactions were digital. So actually, I used 10 or 20 times in 6 years cash. So that means and I know that India has been making a massive revolution on that. So I think that's probably going to be the biggest challenge on fintech, is making money digital and making money safer and more transparent. Because, for instance, if you look at, there is a study that says that, for instance, the percentage of cocaine in, for instance, a note of dollar, it's massive, which makes me scared, because that means if we are touching $1 notes or any other notes, we might have a lot of contagion, a lot of different things. So that's a lot of even practical stuff. And as well, for instance, if you look from a technology perspective, the biggest technology in the world is still paper. Okay, we cannot forget that paper is a technology. It was a technology invented thousands of years ago, but it's still a paper, and it's still a technology. So I think this is a massive shift. So if we manage to shift this to digital and make sure that fintech companies can actually create systems simple to use, we're going to have a much better operationality and better systems that can help us enable everything that is happening in the world. And I think for me, this is the biggest advantage. And that's why some of the fintech biggest players in the world are worth billions of dollars. For instance, Revolut is right now worth $5.5 billion. And they have close to $800 million of funding. You have massive companies that are becoming bigger than actually banks. For instance, if you look at Currency Cloud, is making transactions in 250 countries around the world. For instance, if you look at TransferWise, is one of the biggest operations. For instance, right now, the Ant Financial, which is the division of finance and fintech from the initially start with the chat and all these different things, is an Alibaba, the group, it's bigger than Alibaba Group. So, and then, for instance, if you look at Amazon at the moment, is the biggest fintech player in the world, in the Western world at least. And mostly they are using fintech tools for making the payments within their platform. So Amazon, it's a great example. There is a biggest Colossus that is right now the biggest fintech player in numbers. So they give you more loans in business than most of the banks in the planet. So that's just examples where we have the biggest e-commerce platforms becoming fintech players. And for instance, if you look at Google or even Apple with Apple Pay, this is becoming mainstream to a point right now. And I think the challenge right now is between the conventional banking industry and the technology industry. And how are we going to have this merger of the two, and eventually who is going to lead the next wave of digital innovation and fintech landscape?
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. Most payments I made, for me personally, I make most of my payments through my phone, especially when it comes to, especially with the rise of e-commerce and shopping online. No one really wants to step out of their houses, I feel. They just want to do it online, especially with the integration of Stripe integration, for example. A lot of people are just, no one wants to step outside and interact and make that payment. And it started, and it's been around for a while, like starting with phone payments. So it's really interesting to see how things have been changing and evolving. And I especially like that you mentioned that paper is a technology. So it kind of just shows that, it kind of suggests that this isn't just like a transformation, it's just an integration that's going to keep on and on continuing. So thank you for that. So you've been a contributor to various governments and organizations worldwide. How are they using AI and technology in this ongoing pandemic?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, actually. First of all, I'm very disappointed with governments. I think, so one of my first things, and that's why I actually launched my last book. And my last book is 4AR, and is about reinventing nations. So it touches precisely this. And I wrote this book because I was very frustrated with the lack of digital by most of the governments. So it's actually scary. Because most of the governments are focused on politics and intrigues and looking at populism, short-term things, instead of looking at this. For instance, I mentioned before, if you look at data and just pure macro data, we can actually solve most of the problems in the world. And for instance, I think a lot of the challenge in the financial industry, for instance, before the crisis, there was just restrictions, there was no money. Then suddenly we put $5 trillion in the world economy in the space of 3 weeks. So I think the challenge right now is going to be, so picking on the governments, is point one is looking at seriously in terms of digital transformation. Until we look at digital transformation seriously, we cannot solve the problems. Okay, and this has to be the critical element of government. That's what my book talks about, reinventing nations. And I think if we don't take this more serious, we're going to have a serious dysfunctionality and probably a kind of Blade Runner or even worse scenario coming on. So I would say that most of the governments are struggling. And I know that it's not completely the fault of the especially people that work for the government, but especially our leaders are increasingly, I'm not going to go to any political statement, but I think it's very important that our leaders are really bad on digital. Okay, that's the first element. Is actually, for me, it scares me. And actually, I changed my business models and strategy because I became a bit of a digital activist in the sense of using, for instance, digital literacy is a criminal that we're not using this in schools. And I think... So, and I think the efforts that your government in India is doing, I think India has a massive responsibility because you are the biggest fintech, actually probably technology player in the world at the moment. Most of the, well, if you look at all the CEOs of the biggest corporations, they are Chinese. And as well, most of the technology that has been built in the world is actually built in India. So I think we need digital literacy first. And our leaders, I think my challenge is the leadership. And I think especially what is happening with the COVID-19, first, it's scary that there's no coordination between the different countries in terms of clinical trials. Whereas if you just put all the clinical trials together using blockchain and AI, eventually you could solve the problem of COVID-19 in 1 month. Because there's thousands of scientists. For instance, I'm working with a couple of scientists working in solutions. Some of them are already finding cures. But then when you find the first test that goes right, you need 3 to 8 months to get it to something that works. So if you just put all these scientists working together using basic healthcare technology, using blockchain, we immediately could solve this. So this is a lack of global coordination. And instead of accusing each other, we should be focused on solving the problems. So if the money finally appeared, so suddenly we have $5 trillion, why they just don't put all the scientists working together? Instead of just blaming China or blaming someone, we should just tackle the problems and make things. And I think it's really important that we create things instead of blaming. That's one of my rules. In my team, if someone blames, it gets in trouble with me. So if you have something that is wrong, come up with a solution. That's the point here.
Yes.
And it's not easy. It's not easy.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. I think the problem also starts at the root. In terms of education and schooling, a lot of the methods that are being employed by teachers are still there's a shift in digital, but it's pretty much all analog. Everything is analog. Textbooks are handed out, books are given out. I think technology needs to be incorporated in schools more. Like every single system is changing, but education still kind of remains stagnant, in my opinion. And in terms of healthcare and fixing things regarding the virus, I think because of that resistance to using digital, there's also like, it's causing a resistance in the sharing of data because of how scared people are of digital. So I think that's also preventing something from happening.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a very good point there. So, for instance, there's a paradox is that, for instance, everyone is using massive amount of technology from Facebook to any phone. Any phone is this is the biggest technology tool, any phone that we have. So I think the challenge right now is how can we make sure that people use this technology for learning, not just for wasting time. For instance, even the biggest, let's say, most of our leaders, they don't know anything about technology. They have a smartphone, the most advanced smartphone in the world. So the smartphone knows more about them than actually probably they know about themselves. And that's the challenge right now is how can we go and for instance, you guys are a company that uses chatbots and AI. And this is actually the moment is that how can we make technology less complex? And at the same time, we can actually make our students to use it for good. Okay.
Yeah, I think right now technology has a bad reputation because it's seen as pretty much a device to help millennials waste time, which is not the case because technology is changing the game.
Completely with you. And I think that's for me the most important thing. And as well, that's where I think companies like yours have to lead as well this, because we are all citizens and the world is ours. So at the end of the day.
Thank you. So how will digital transformation backed by data change how businesses facilitate decision making?
So I think data is the oil of the 20th century, and actually the oil just last days has been actually melting down completely. So we need increasingly more and better quality of data. That's point one. But this is still not happening. I think at the moment, all of us have massive amounts of data from our social media channels to our even playing on Instagram or Facebook. It's about data. The challenge right now is most of the business are not using data. They're not data driven. So for instance, there's 450 million SMEs and startups in the world. And this represents probably 80 to 90% of the jobs in the world. And most of these business are small business or family business. Let's say a mom and pop's business, which is most of the world economy. And this is a challenge is that we need to make sure that this business, and actually, for instance, they are the ones that suffer more with the COVID-19 pandemic. Because of course, if you cannot have, for instance, in India, if you cannot go to the street and sell your small business, your food and things like that, you're starving. And this is, for instance, in emerging markets is massive, but even in not just emerging markets as well here in Europe or in Latin America, in all places it's the same. So I think we need definitely a bigger education on this level. And as well, this is an education not just for the areas of people, individuals, but as well, especially for the business. I think until business take this serious, and even me, for instance, one thing is me in my hat of thought leader or author. The other thing is my hat as CEO. As CEO, for instance, I need to be much more data driven. For instance, if I would be more data driven, I probably could be getting much more results in my business. And for instance, that's the challenge that I have as a leader, because I need to be me, but my team needs to be data driven. And for instance, the challenge I have is, how can we make sure that we are data driven, but we still are humans? We still need to make sure that me and you interacting, how we interact, our emotional intelligence. And for instance, if people are in multiple countries, which is right now increasing happening, we can actually look at the different cultures. Because for instance, in India, if I speak in one tone, it's seen in a way. If I go, for instance, if I raise my voice in Sweden, it might be considered aggressive or very bad. But in Portugal and Spain, you end up actually raising your voice in a much bigger level. So these small details are increasing massive importance. So I think the business analytics is one thing and is critical on the data side, but the human part of emotional intelligence is as important as that. So we need to find a balance between this emotional data, emotional data is as important as the business analytics data. And I think this is a bridge. If you look at Cambridge Analytica, what happened with Brexit, what happened with Trump is using data to manipulate emotions. Whatever you like it or not, I'm not going to politics, I'm talking purely on the data. And this is incredibly important. So I think coming to business, it has to be there's a very tiny border between the emotional data, because it's critical. No one speaks about emotional data, emotional intelligence data, which is critical. And then, of course, the data about, for instance, data about bankruptcies, data about the business, data about liquidity and cash flow. For instance, if governments will be just looking at this data on a real time, would be saving their economies. Because let's say, and it's very easy, because for instance, most of the countries have a company's house. So if you put all the companies house and you oblige your clients, when they pay the taxes, to understand, okay, send us a report of your transactions, even if you're a small business. And if you put that in a data funnel, we could tell real time what is happening in the economy. And this could save millions of lives, and it could make the economy much more transparent. Because if you see that 90% of the economy is going bankrupt or is having challenges, then the governments can actually go for that. So that's not, from a theory perspective, is actually quite simple. The problem is how we include this and we simplify this without and it comes back to emotional intelligence, the culture or the religious. And you know that in India, with the divisions between the different religions and castes, is that we need to fight that. And as well, coming up with simple ways to make technology easy to interact, but as well, not to forget the real problems of the world, because it's data as well. It has the data for the business, and then there's the data for emotions, cultural. And then, for instance, in my case, I spend probably more time with the emotional intelligence, even me and my team, than actually on the data side. So because the data is quite straightforward, but if you don't have the balance between the two things, it's very challenging thing.
Mm-hmm. I think, emotional intelligence plays a huge part in a lot of business decisions and a lot of data points. I think that's why there's the birth of sentiment analysis came about, because people wanted to track that. So what are your thoughts on the broad level concept of the future of work? And what are the key tenets and technologies that will drive the adoption?
Yeah, so I think we touched a couple of them, but I think so. The future of work, ironically, is right now being skyrocketed and leapfrog with everything happening with COVID-19, because most of the old economy is becoming digital, whether you like it or not. So I think
very abrupt shift, I feel, and I think a lot of people didn't even expect that. It just happened. So
I think that's the first angle. So I think we are already on the future of work right now increasing. So because so everything right now is going to be increasing more digital. And in one end, it's good because, for instance, I mentioned that 90% of financial industry is already digital, but the rest of the economy and business is not. For instance, actually, I mentioned that for under 50 million business, and for instance, another study that is a bit scary, actually we create the platform Open Business Council for that, and Cities ABC, is that there's from the world, let's say from the 450 million SME and business in the world, around 80% to 90% don't even have a website or a digital profile. And no one speaks about this. Okay, so this is a massive problem. Okay, so that means how can you make your business transparent? A good example is Bangladesh, for instance, the garment industry in Bangladesh, which is the biggest garment industry in India as well. So most of these companies are providing garments to the biggest corporations in the planet. And for instance, they are like, sometimes they have 5,000 employees, but they don't even have a website. So that means when there's a crisis like this, they all go bankrupt. So,
Mhm.
so this comes to the future of work. There's two angles here. There's the angle, of course, of making things digital and making people able to do this, but as well, very small things. So making sure that the company has a website, that the governments are talking with the companies on digital, not on paper, which is ridiculous that we still have to use paper. I love paper, I love books, but we need to use the technology of our time. So I think we need to demystify the future of work, not just because of trends that is beautiful to go and things like that. But for instance, most of this, one of the things I was a bit shocked, both in the UK and most of Europe right now, just for instance, children and the teachers, which is a critical element, and even universities. 90% of the families don't even have more than one computer at home. So, so that means the teachers cannot teach the students.
Yeah.
And most of the teachers don't even have a way to teach them digital. So this is very stupid. Come on, for God's sake, we can use a phone. My phone, I can just do a Zoom room. It takes 1 minute to set up, and they have 20 children. And or even I've been teaching in business schools. I can have my class with 20 students, wherever they are in the world. So I think it's very easy, but at the same time, it's not so easy. So a lot of things are perception, and the perception is the most important thing, and that's for me the most risky part right now. So I think it's really very, very scary for me, that part. Okay, so yeah, I'm just trying to get that part right. And I think that is the future of work right now, is getting from the this kind of top level things to the right things. And that is not easy, because it's very, very disturbing that we have these things. So I would say the future of work right now is making sure that these tools go to day-to-day things, and that we make them easy, but at the same time that we make it happen. And we cannot be waiting, because the urgency, it's so scary right now. And I think that's my main focus right now.
So I'm going to move on to my final question. Are there any other thoughts you'd like to share with our audience?
I think platforms like yours are critical, because you are a technology company and as well working chatbots. I think this thought leadership of business to business is super important. And I think as well, we need to act. We cannot wait for our governments. Unfortunately, I have to be realistic. I think 90% of the governments in the world are failing their basic stuff. I'm not saying that is their fault. It's very complex. We cannot just blame people. But we have a responsibility, each of us. You have a responsibility talking with me and talking with your team. And I think this thought leadership is critical, because we need to come up with solutions that can help anyone, and at the same time can do. So I think there's a responsibility of all of us to act and not let the tools using us. And I think that's for me the biggest challenge right now. Is the challenge right now is how can we make sure that we don't create a dystopic functional society, because this is probably what is happening right now with COVID-19 pandemic is the biggest challenge in the Western civilization. And I see this very similar to the fall of the Roman Empire and the beginning of the Middle Ages. And of course, if you look at even China and India, you've been having massive civilizations in the last thousands of years, but suddenly a small crisis can destroy the entire civilization. And you go back to very basic stuff. So I would love that companies like ours can avoid that. We don't destroy the good of our civilization, because everyone speaks about the bad things, but in the end of the day, we have less poverty than ever in the history of mankind. For instance, look at India, the poverty has been falling massive, and there's a medium class that is raising and becoming bigger than actually all Europe together. So I think right now is, let's look at the positive things. Let's avoid the negative stuff. But we need as well, we have especially companies in AI and data, we have a responsibility as well to cut and destroy the fake news and all this kind of obsession for negativity. And I think we need really to kill that, because if you kill, for instance, at the moment, the quantity of paranoia around conspiracy theories and going against scientific basics is becoming almost as big as the good things that are happening. And this is stupid, because, of course, if you keep talking about conspiracy theories, for instance, there are people spending more time building websites for coming up with stupid things than actually to help people. And as well, for instance, the backlash about people trashing Bill Gates because he wants to help people. For God's sake, let him help. At least he's doing something. For God's sake. And there's a kind of people, anyone has, and this is probably my last word, everyone thinks they can have a say because they have access to social media tools. And for instance, chatbots are particularly important, but there's a responsibility as well. I think people, if they're going to speak, well, one thing is me, that I'm a thought leader and the interview, and as well business educator and so forth. But even me, I have a responsibility. So if someone is at their house and trashing people, for God's sake, use your energy to produce something positive, because the negative energy and this part, unfortunately, of humanity, it's just a destruction machine. And I think that's my biggest challenge, is that level of destruction that we have as humans, it's very scary. So I would suggest that we need to fight against that. And then education, especially for business intelligence, using chatbots for good. And there's a lot of business opportunities, because if you have the world economy, 90% is still not digital. So that means companies like yours can grow 90% or more. So it's just the examples that we need to follow. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you in terms of the spreading of misinformation and conspiracy theories. There's a lot of energy that goes into posting that, and I think it's kind of pointless, to be honest. Which is why we we at Engati actually made a chatbot for the virus, because there's so many things being said about the virus, so many myths and so many conspiracy theories that are being spread. So we made a chatbot called the Fight Against COVID, and it basically just tells you about myths that are being debunked, statistics, things you can do at home, how you can stay informed. Because I think the most important thing right now in terms of combating the virus is to stay informed. So
yes, I'm completely with you. And I think that's, for me, the most important thing right now. If we don't get this right, we have a serious problem. So I think it's great that we are talking here and leading these things. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you so much. We've got some really amazing insights from you. So Engati Engage will be back with a new expert in a new episode really soon. So stick around. And thank you for talking to us. It's been a great interview.